Hello all. I see people still coming in, but with the interest of time, I think let's get going and started. Uh, Good morning, good afternoon, and good day from all over the world, I believe. I am Madhu Narayanaswamy. I work for a company called SNB Infrastructure. I am out of Houston. I'm also the vice chair for the American Planners Association's Transportation Planning Division. I'm pleased to have this webinar going through today, where we are going to talk about APA's legislative update on the upcoming Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. Our partners in crime on this webinar are, next slide, please. The Planners Advocacy Network. It is basically the APA's national network of planning advocates. We really love if you can join this advocacy network and help grow our voice heard together. The link is provided there. If you're not part of this organization, do so, join this organization. I got a chance to work with Jason on many items through this organization as well. I'll introduce Jason shortly after this. Another organization that I'm representing here is the APA's Transportation Planning Division. We have around 5,000 members of planners to help share transportation planning discussions and share our thoughts together and advocate for a common cause. Again, if you're not part of this division, do please register and join this division as well. So without further regard, I would like to introduce Jason Jordan, who will be our speaker today, who is going to talk about the legislative briefing on the Surface Reauthorization Bill. Jason Jordan is the Public Affairs Director for the APA, overarching APA. He leads our government affairs, policy, and advocacy efforts of the American Planners Association. He also developed policy guides, which I used to work with him on a couple of policy guides as well. He is our representation of APA with congressional officers, federal agencies, and any partner agencies alongside there. Jason also provides us the strategic guidance to volunteer leaders on policy matter on different levels, be it state, national, or local level. He has been with APA for 23 years and helping us grow and be and help us become a bigger voice in the legislative process as well. With that, Jason, could you take over?
Thanks very much. Appreciate that introduction and appreciate the partnership with the Transportation Planning Division. It's great to be working together on such a timely and important topic like the Surface Transportation Reauthorization. We're really coming to you with breaking news in a sense, because so much has been happening just over the course of this week on this topic. So I thought I would start just by catching people up on sort of where we are procedurally before we jump into the substance of the bills we want to talk about today. You probably saw that a little over a week ago, the first congressional committee to take action on the reauthorization, that happened with a vote in the Senate Environment Public Works Committee. That's the main Senate committee of jurisdiction. That was followed just the middle of this week, Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. The House Transportation and Infrastructure marked up their bill. So all of this is happening, of course, in the context of a broader debate over infrastructure. But these committees are really focusing on one component of infrastructure, which is the Surface Transportation Reauthorization. You all know that expires September 30th. So Congress is working to put in place a new authorization. There are some additional steps in the process, though. One is that the Senate has multiple committees of jurisdiction. And so the Senate Banking Committee is the committee that is responsible for the transit program. That committee hasn't taken any action yet. Another Senate committee that's responsible for this bill is the Senate Commerce Committee. They deal with the rail components as well as some safety components of the legislation. They have released a bill yesterday, a draft, and that bill will be voted on next week on the 16th of June. Also yesterday, the leadership of the House came forward and said that the last week of June, the full House will vote on the bill that was passed out of committee. So we've got a couple of items already on the calendar, but we still have some question marks in terms of the pay-fors for this bill have to come through Finance and Ways and Means. We don't know what the process is going to look like in those committees. And of course, looming over all of this is the back and forth that you've probably seen on the news this week around what's happening with the broader infrastructure package. That's still very much unclear whether this bill will become the infrastructure package or whether a broader bill will move through, possibly through a reconciliation process or possibly through regular order. So we're going to have to see how these pieces fit together. Again, sort of let me focus a little bit more sharply on the transportation piece here. At the markup this week, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee Chairman, Mr. DeFazio from Oregon, made it very clear that his desire is to move through what's known as regular order, meaning not to try to move this through reconciliation. In part, the rationale for that is the reconciliation process, while it has the benefit of only a simple majority in the Senate, a lot of the policy changes, in fact, most of the reform elements that are in both of these bills can't be done via reconciliation. It's mostly for funding levels. So his goal is to move it through this regular order process where the committees would vote, it would go to the floor of both chambers, and he envisions a traditional conference committee to hammer out the differences between the two bills. It remains to be seen exactly how that will unfold and whether they'll go to a traditional conference committee or if there'll be a separate negotiated process. But certainly we can see that the next steps in this process will be moving a bill off the House floor at the end of June, which meets the Speaker's goal of something happening before the 4th of July break. And then these Senate committees need to move their measures forward. I think when we talk about the substance in just a second of these bills, you will see that while there are differences between the two, one sort of common theme here is that they both set a pretty high floor, if you will, for what a negotiated bill would look like. That is, there are a lot of very positive provisions in both bills. So even as they come together and negotiate out a compromise, I think we start from a very positive place in terms of the priorities that APA has articulated over the course of more than a year now. At the same time, there's some familiar problems. There's a reason why these bills often end up in long extensions, and despite the fact that there's a lot of agreement about the need, it never quite gets across the finish line, or it takes a long time to get across the finish line. And we're going to face those same challenges. And largely, they're about the money. They're about not just overall funding levels, but the future of the Highway Trust Fund, resistance to changes to existing user fees like the gas tax, other sorts of pay-fors carry their own political baggage and make it very difficult to move this bill through regular order. So we're still going to confront that. We're also confronting this idea of how this fits in with a larger infrastructure debate that's unfolding. So that's kind of where we're headed. But I think it's clear that we have significant momentum right now with the 2 votes in committee that we've already had, another committee vote scheduled, the floor vote. There's a clear sense of an open window of opportunity for action. So let's turn to looking specifically at these 2 bills. There's a lot to cover here, so I'm going to hit some high-level themes and then happy to take questions at the end and even offline to dig into some of the details. One of the biggest differences that you will see in the 2 bills that have been voted on so far is both their overall funding level, with significantly more funding in the House bill, but also their approach to moving through committee. So in the Senate, a lot of effort was made to ensure that this was a bipartisan bill introduced both by the chairman of the committee and the ranking minority member of the committee, and thus got unanimous support in the vote. You contrast that to the situation in the House, where the bill was largely, almost exclusively a party line vote. 2 Republicans joined with the rest of the Democrats, but certainly has a much more partisan flavor, which is not uncommon when you compare the political realities of the 2 chambers. The House bill largely looks to the administration's infrastructure plan. The American Jobs Plan is the blueprint, but it also looks a whole lot like the bill that the House was able to pass in 2020. In fact, both of these bills, there's a sort of sense of deja vu all over again, if you will, in terms of the fact that, we saw the Senate EPW pass a unanimous bill through committee in 2019 that never moved anywhere in the Senate. We saw the House move a much larger package through the floor. It never went anywhere in the Senate. We certainly hope that that's not where we end up this year. And I think the political dynamics are a lot different than they were then. But sort of these early acts of the drama are similar to what we've seen before. One of the other things that I would mention just up front here is that the House bill really does take a fix-it-first focus in the bill. So even though there's a lot of additional highway money, there are a lot of new requirements for what states would have to do if they want to use that money to expand, as opposed to putting that into existing infrastructure or investing in other modes, which is a source of some controversy. The House bill also takes a much stronger approach on suballocation, that is giving locals more control of the money as opposed to relying on states through formula programs. That too is pretty controversial. The House bill also, for the first time in a number of years, brings back earmarks. So there are actual specific projects proposed by members of Congress with lots of restrictions on what could be proposed, but the earmarks are there in the House bill. The Senate bill, in contrast, is very much more state focused, which you would expect given the nature of representation in the Senate. Therefore, it's more formula driven, but it does contain a number of new pilot programs and new grant programs that try to address some of the specific areas of new concern. So that's sort of the top line view of these two bills. We'll talk more specifically about some of the key provisions. I'll start with the money, and this really sort of just amplifies what I was just saying about the House focus being a little bit stronger on local control. What you see is that the so-called suballocation, the amount of money driven directly to MPOs as part of the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, which is the sort of primary pot of money that we're often focused on. The House moves that percentage from the existing 55% that's retained in the Senate bill to a higher 60% over the course of the 5 years of the bill. It also provides several new programs that sort of expand on this idea of suballocation. So there's a $1 billion metro performance allocation, again, that would go to MPOs for direct obligation. There's another $500 million for gridlock reduction grants that would also be aimed at local projects and not flow through the states. Both bills continue work on vehicle miles traveled fee pilot program. Both expand that to a national pilot, trying to move toward a replacement or a complement to the existing gas tax through the VMT levy idea. There is a new rural grant program in the Senate bill, as well as a significant expansion of bridge funding in the Senate bill. The House bill also has additional bridge money. Both bills also sort of push suballocation down to smaller sized communities as part of the overall structure of the bill. One of the key pillars for APA has been maintaining that this legislation needs to tackle climate change more aggressively. Both of the bills that have been proposed and voted through committee have climate titles, which would be a historic first for a surface transportation bill. And they're very similar in many respects, but the biggest difference, and this is important for us, is that the House bill relies much more heavily on planning-led approach to climate change, with planning baked into the transportation planning process, new performance measures required, and then project selection linked to those performance measures. So both bills fund hazard mitigation, resiliency, electric vehicle charging station development, other sorts of carbon reduction strategies. Both use a mix of both formula money and grant money. So some of this would come through a new apportionment and some would come through a competitive process. But the basic pieces are quite similar. But again, the House bill relying a little more heavily on planning and is a little more prescriptive in how it deploys planning. The Senate bill focuses on a state carbon reduction strategy, as opposed to some of the more stringent standards and performance measures that would be set in the Senate bill. On the subject of biking and walking. So the main biking and walking program is the TAP program, the Transportation Alternatives Program. This is where most of the federally supported biking and walking projects and planning come from. Both bills adopt provisions from legislation that APA has previously endorsed that would both expand and reform the TAP program. This would be a major new infusion of funding, and it's really remarkable when you think that just a few years ago there was a big debate about whether this program would even continue to exist. I mean, if you go back a couple of reauthorizations, this was very much an existential question for biking and walking. And now, both bills have agreed to significantly expand TAP. The biggest difference between the two measures is again on the issue of suballocation. So the existing TAP program actually empowers MPOs to do a lot more, have a lot more direct engagement in how TAP monies are spent. They run competitions. They can distribute those funding levels. The House bill would increase the percentage of money that would go into that process for direct MPO control to 66%, would drive more of the money out that way. The Senate bill is a little less generous in that regard, but both move to a percentage set aside allocation of 10%, which is where we get the boost in funding. They provide funding for technical assistance, which could support some of the planning process and some of the implementation work that MPOs have to do. The House bill is a little bit stronger on limiting the ability of states to transfer money out of TAP altogether, which has been a problem in a handful of places. But again, both of the measures, both of the bills have measures that advance biking and walking in the TAP program. Looking at safety, again, this is an area where pre-existing legislation that APA had worked on and endorsed has been incorporated into both of these measures, a little bit slightly different ways, but a couple of kind of high-level takeaways on safety. Both would support Vision Zero planning for pedestrian safety. Both create mechanisms for the development of vulnerable road user assessment planning requirements. And then when states hit certain threshold of safety problems, it would force states to target some of the safety money into those specific locations to meet the performance standards that would be identified in the user assessment. Both expand the Safe Routes to School program, extend that to high schools, and both tackle in somewhat different ways complete streets and context-sensitive design. The Senate bill is a little less prescriptive in that regard. It would require a dedication of funding for complete streets planning. The House bill goes a little bit further to ensure that DOT, US DOT, prescribe certain complete streets policies and that those are embedded. There's funding available in both bills to sort of drive those policies into practice. So similar on safety, a little bit more funding and a little bit more sort of prescriptive requirements from the House bill on the safety front. On transit, this is a difficult one to make an apples to apples comparison because, as I mentioned at the outset, the Banking Committee in the Senate is the group that will write all of the transit provisions. There are a couple of items that are related to the EPW bill. One is transit-oriented development eligibility, specifically called out in a loan guarantee program known as TIFIA. And when we look at the bill that the Commerce Committee drafted, we can see a $25 billion significant increase for Amtrak, overall $36 billion for rail in that Commerce Committee bill, which was introduced with Republican support and is expected to be adopted on a near unanimous vote, if not a unanimous vote, next week. So you can see significant new rail funding coming out of the Senate. It's a more open question about what's going to happen with the transit provisions in the Senate and the Banking Committee. There's a little more controversy there. And certainly, I think we would see lower funding levels than what's been approved in the House. The other issue is that the Senate seems more committed to the existing ratio of highway to transit investment, roughly 80-20, whereas the House bill tries to, it's not moving to parity, but it's moving closer in that direction. So let's take a look at the House bill for a second, kind of high level perspective on the transit title here. So overall, it's $109 billion over the life of the bill for transit. It triples funding for Amtrak. It creates a new grant stream for high-speed and passenger rail programs. On the public transportation side of the equation, it invests a lot in zero-emission buses, and it has a number of provisions that are sort of aimed at ensuring that transit investment really meets equity needs, and it includes some provisions that target low-income communities for additional investment, for better service, looking at things like no-fare pilot programs, frequency of service initiatives, et cetera. It too focuses on TOD. It has the same provision about TOD eligibility in the TIFIA program, but it also creates some new requirements in the New Starts process for evaluating the ability of new transit service to expand affordable housing options along the transit corridor. It also creates extends really an office at USDOT focused on TOD and supporting TOD planning, something we've long supported. It includes an interesting provision that would allow other federal funds through the Community Development Block Grant Program and the Economic Development Administration to be counted toward the local share requirements in the New Starts process, which is a big deal. That's often prohibited, and it's a way of ensuring that a broader set of communities are competitive because they can use those other federal funding streams as part of the local share. There's also provisions in there that expand on the concept of mobility as a service as part of the overall transit program. So we have a much more fleshed out view of a transit title in the House bill. We'll see what comes from the Senate. Reconnecting communities and equity issues are, I think, important and sort of headline aspects of both of these bills, very new initiatives to address very much longstanding problems, but at different scales. So both bills anticipate a new program that would support both planning as well as capital investment aimed at reconnecting communities where earlier infrastructure investments had disrupted and disadvantaged certain communities and neighborhoods in those places. This could be reconnecting with new infrastructure, it could be taking existing infrastructure out. Both include dedicated planning grants for tackling this problem and supporting the public engagement around this issue. The Senate bill treats it as more of a pilot program, and with a $500 million funding level, the House ramps up much more quickly with a full $3 billion for this program. Some other important things to note on the House bill: there's a community investment grant program, again, sort of focused on investment in lower income communities, a new active transportation connectivity grant program, which is aimed at bringing active transportation opportunities to communities that may have been underserved in that way. There's also provisions around accessibility and housing and planning that are contained in the House bill. On the Senate side, a couple of things worth noting, and there's a similar provision in the House bill, but this transportation access pilot program is really planning oriented and focused on providing some resources to better understand access issues, measuring access to jobs, access to economic opportunities, and baking that into the public process and into the planning process, and providing some funding for expanding data and expanding modeling and improving that process. Similarly, there's a prioritization process pilot program where MPOs could compete for grant resources to make the project prioritization process more transparent and more open to the public and engage the public in new ways. So both bills have planning-led, planning-oriented equity programs really at the heart of the bill. Moving on to one of the last pillars of our sort of advocacy and our perspective here is the issue of future mobility. And the bills are pretty similar in this regard. Both add micromobility options as eligible items under the CMAQ program. So things like bike share, scooter programs, et cetera, could be supported with CMAQ dollars. Both take a hard look at the impact and design standards for autonomous vehicles with a clearinghouse study recommendations. There's modeling focus in both bills. Both look at emerging technologies of various stripes with some additional research dollars and some pilot programs. And there's a metropolitan planning research pilot baked into the House bill, sort of looking at more innovative cutting edge approaches to transportation planning that could be supported through new research funding. So very similar on future mobility options and core components really included in both of the bills. I know I ran through a lot of stuff at a high level at a breakneck pace, so I'm sure there are some questions that are out there, but I'm going to pause here and see what sorts of questions or issues we might want to discuss. I'm sure you can use the chat feature to let us know some of your questions. And Madhu, maybe you can take it from here in terms of what we want to talk about.
Oh, thank you, Jason. Great outline. We are starting to get some questions up here. One thing quickly wanted to tell us, we will be planning to put the slides along with the recording and also continue to summarize and present this information on the policy advocacy website. So if you're not a member, please do join. It is free, of course, for all APA members. With that, the first question is, we are talking about the money for bridge, right? Highway bridges. Does that mean it also includes for pedestrian access bridges, pedestrian only bridges as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One of the sort of less high profile provisions in the T&I bill, the House bill, is to fairly significantly expand funding specifically for those so-called access bridges, pedestrian access bridges, as opposed to traditional car freight bridges. So yeah, it is both are envisioned. There's a bit more of a focus on that in the House bill, but the Senate bridge program would also cover those projects as well.
And how about, like we talked about the Safe Routes to School program. Now it doesn't exist as it's in that name, but all rolled under TAP and other things. So is that going to be coming back again?
It is coming back. Well, assuming the bill moves forward, right? But the bill anticipates codifying and creating a structure for the Safe Routes program in a version that is basically what we remember from before. It makes some expansions. I mentioned the expansion of coverage through 12th grade, through high school. It also creates some new eligibilities, to support sort of encouraging walking and so forth. So it expands the program a little bit. It codifies the program and moves it, into the high schools as well.
Do you have a sense of how Senate thinks about the earmarks, or are they going to?
It's interesting. They have been a lot more reluctant on the earmark front than the House. I think the anticipation is that they will come along with their own earmarks as part of a conference process or a negotiated settlement, between the two bills at the end. They made the decision not to incorporate them at the markup level. But there have been conversations happening behind the scenes. It is worth noting that they haven't shut the door to earmarks on the Senate side. It's more a matter that they decided not to bake it into their process in the way that the House did. And that could prove problematic. But I think the feeling was that it would be easier to move these bills without the earmarks initially and then to add them in But the House from the get-go really felt like that would be a sweetener for folks to support these measures. And I think we will see the earmarks come back in once these, the bills are put together. Both parties in the Senate agreed that, earmarks are acceptable now, both in the appropriations process as well as in the transportation reauthorization process. So I think we will see them.
I know we are at the set time, but do you have a few more minutes, Jason, to run through a couple of questions?
Sure, let's take a few more. Happy to do that. But I would also say, for folks, we can't get to all the questions I know that are out there, and there's a lot of detail. Do keep the conversation going with us, and do look for some of the content. We do want to do some deeper dives as this process moves forward to unpack all of the specifics. I mean, it's kind of hard to do probably 3,000 pages worth of bill text in 30 minutes, but we do want to answer your questions. But let's say we take a couple more.
Sure. I'm going to quickly make, I'm seeing a lot of questions about equity in freight plans. I think we need to take a deeper dive into that. A lot of questions about TODs, complete like funding for TODs and affordable housing, what it means. Probably we need to take a deeper dive in that. Also, a lot of questions on electrification infrastructure. We need to take those by itself will be occupying a whole session. So I'm just going to place those questions on the side and address that in the future sessions. When we talk about, quickly, can you summarize again, what are the next steps of these bills?
Yeah, sure. So the House is easy to summarize because the next thing we'll see is a vote of the full House in about 2 weeks' time, the last week of the month. We don't have the specific date yet. The T&I bill will move to the floor. It's not clear whether it will move with the funding associated, the pay-fors associated with it or not. I suspect not. I suspect they'll hold that, and they'll move basically the T&I bill as sort of the base. The Senate's more complicated. We'll see the Commerce Committee vote next week. We're going to just wait on banking. They have to do the transit component before they can assemble the package to take to the floor. I think in terms of overall timing, the House has the luxury of being able to move a little faster. We'll see their bill come out, before the 4th of July. The Senate is probably going to be aiming for getting something out before the August recess, with the idea that we would look at September as the time to try to put these things together, hopefully avoid a further extension, but that certainly remains to be seen. And again, that funding piece kind of hangs over everything, right? Because they can put the policy together. I think there is you saw that the bills are different, but they're similar enough that the pathway to a compromise is there, especially if some of the more partisan issues can be kind of sanded off a little around the edges. It's the funding piece that's going to be a challenge. I suspect we will end up with something that probably looks a little bit more like the Senate bill than the House bill, just given the nature of things. But we'll have to see, and we'll also have to see what decisions are made on a broader infrastructure package that could either incorporate this or be connected to it in somehow. So we'll have to see where those negotiations go. Those are very much ongoing, as you know from reading today's newspapers. So I will say, if I could just add one more piece on that, I think one of the takeaways here beyond the policy specifics is that timeline that I just outlined means it's really important that folks continue having conversations with their congressional representatives about what's important from a planning perspective in the bill, because now is the time. And getting those provisions in these committee drafts, getting them approved on the floor, now is the time. Those final negotiations at the very end of the process is much harder to change some of this stuff than it is when we have opportunities in committee. And it's just important to be raising your voice with your own congressional representatives about this issue.
I'll go through 2 more questions and then we can wrap it up. Are there any language about MPO's requirement to do planning beyond their region, talking about mega region?
There are some provisions that talk about so-called mega regional planning, so beyond the existing boundaries of the MPO, but it's not terribly prescriptive. It's more a kind of an opportunity area that's identified. I think it creates a pathway for some of that. There are also some provisions for smaller MPOs to work together, particularly since they're pushing sub-allocation bands down to smaller MPOs. So they're trying to do some things there to encourage that that coordination. It's not quite as, I think, direct as the question implies, but there are some provisions in there.
Is there any discussion regarding internet connectivity to the rural regions within this bill?
Yeah, there's been a great question. Broadband is one of our priorities at APA for overall infrastructure, and there's been a lot of talk about it in the transportation committees. When Secretary Buttigieg came up, he spoke specifically about broadband as infrastructure and the connection to transportation. These bills only hint at it. And that's where I think the larger conversation about infrastructure kind of comes into play and makes it a little bit murky. So there's not direct funding for rural broadband here. But, you know, there are, I mentioned that rural program in the Senate bill. It's framed in terms of economic development and economic opportunity. You could very easily see broadband being interpreted as an eligible item as part of that that formula funding, and a council that's also being created. So that's a space where I think we would have to look to some of the other federal legislation that's out there to fully tackle the broadband issue. But there are spaces in this bill, or in these bills, I should say, where you can see the bipartisan interest around broadband coming into play.
Okay. Great. With that, with respect to all of your time, I would like to wrap this discussion. There are still some more questions hanging out there. I understand that, but thank you very much for sending those questions. We wanted to keep this kind of discussion going on. We can take this off and discuss it in the advocacy network website, planning.org/advocacy. You can also send your questions to governmentaffairs@planning.org. And we were thinking about having this as a recurring webinar couple of months, once in a couple of months or once in 3 months as we progress and collect more data about the topics to talk from. And do please send us suggestions on what topics or funding topics you would like to hear us more from as well. That, thank you very much, Jason. Thank you, Emily, for everything, setting up everything. Have a wonderful day. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.